So, you're a new player to Deadline and you just have an M4. You have 60k to work with and you've decided that you want to make a gun for yourself. Unfortunately, you don't know how to build a gun properly, and so you go for the low recoil, no recoil attachments without any consideration for other factors of gun design. Thus, you end up with something like this.
Keep cool, stay
And yes, I know the feeling. The gun is super slow, handles like a brick, and you can't really be effective with it. However, that's the purpose of this video. Today I'm going to show you how you can build your guns for different purposes and how you can make them effective and also look good. Let's get into it. Let's start with two very important factors in building an M4. Or just any gun in particular. The first one is ergo. It refers to the handling of the gun, not necessarily how it feels, but more the speed of how your character does things. Here we can see that with this very low ergo build, you aim down the sights really slowly, you even ready the gun extremely slowly. Whereas with this high ergo build, you see that it's pretty fast. It's not the highest ergo build, but it's definitely faster than most things. Then we have recoil. It's pretty self-explanatory. On this high recoil gun, we can see the absolute abomination that is the recoil stat. On the other hand, we have the low recoil gun, which while is pretty long, it has no recoil. In fact, it has a negative stat. The thing is, negative stat just means zero. It doesn't change past zero. Now let's get into the four main types of M4s that you can build to. The first is the SBR, or the short-barreled rifle. They usually have a length of about 10 to 12.5 inches or even less, and they usually have high ergo and not that good of recoil, however still pretty manageable if you build it properly. The second is the GPR, or the general purpose rifle. These are, as said, general purpose, so they can do well at most ranges. However, they're still pretty optimized for close range. The third is the mid-range rifle, I'll call it, because it falls in between the GPR and the next category. These have some long-range power because of the use of magnified scopes. However, they're still pretty effective at close range, and they're just in general a better version of the general purpose rifle. Not in all ways, but at the all-purpose role, it's pretty level, if not in the favor of the mid-range rifles. And finally, we have the SPR, or the special purpose rifle. These are basically baby DMRs, and they are usually having high-powered scopes, maybe 6 times or higher, and they usually don't carry as much ammo because shots count when you use an SPR. Now we'll get into different ways and how you should set up guns, starting with the SBR. Alright, so here's today's example for our SBR build. When it comes to building an SBR, one of the main things that you will have to worry about is the stock. My recommendations are use one of the Magpul MOE, the SLK, the LMT Submod, or the STR carbine stocks. Most other stocks aren't really worth it in my opinion. Or you could go for the Double Star Ace M4 SOCOM Gen 4. Another good option is the Troy M7A1 collapsible stock. It's one of the best short-barreled rifle stocks. However, there's a new one, the Colt 607 Car 15. This one is also actually pretty good as a stock for SBRs. That's what we're gonna use. For our upper, I recommend you use the Daniel Defense Mark 18. It's in the name. The Mark 18 is, after all, a short-barreled rifle. For your lower, honestly, anything is fine as long as it's not the Fightlight SCR lower receiver, because that thing is just wonky and that requires an entire video of its own. For the grip, anything is fine as long as it's not one of these skeletonized stocks, one of these pistol grip stocks, or an Ergo stock like the Ergo PSG or the MDT Premier AVP. So really anything is fine. For this one, I'll just go with the BCM for now. Any 30 round mag will do, and since it doesn't really impact Ergo that much, you can use whatever you want. That means you can use this mag extension or these bottom plates that make stuff look cooler. Remember, for the bolt carrier group, always use the Radian. When it comes to handguards, really, there's the CAC URX, the 8.5 inch and the 10.75 inch. There's the Daniel Defense Wrist Mark 18 Wrist 2. There's the Geissele Super Modular, the very short one, the shortest one actually, the 9.3 inch. As for our barrel, you have really three options. There's the 11.5 inch by Ballistic Advantage. There's the 10.5 inch by Colt Government and the 12.5 inch. For muzzle devices, just go with flash hiders and only go with suppressors if you're really fine with taking the hit to the Ergo. For now, we'll just put on the scan. For Picatinny, any vertical grip will be good. However, when it comes to angled grips, always use the AFG, or if you're going for a stubby grip, just use the BCM Gunfighter. Any will do. For this, we'll use the Daniel Defense Soft Touch Rubber because that's new and it's pretty nice. Then we have to look at the smaller parts. These are really important, such as the trigger guard. You can use any of these as long as you have a lower that allows them. For the trigger, always use the Rise armaments. It boosts your fire rate, or the Radiant weapons. Both of them are good. However, it's really up to the user. I've felt a lot of difference when I use the Radiant weapons and the Rise armaments. The Radiant weapons on one hand is pretty balanced recoiling, whereas Rise armaments has a bit more vertical kick. However, the horizontal recoil is much less noticeable, so I like using that. For a selector, always use the Radiant weapons if possible, the Bolt Catch and the Fire Selector. For a charging handle, you have really four choices: the BCM Gunfighter, the Armaspec Victory, the Noveski Love, or the Radiant Weapons Raptor Ambidextrous. On top, always put on iron sights. It makes the gun look better and it adds ergo. With SBRs, I highly recommend that you use a riser of some sorts, or at least use a large frame windowed optic. So starting with our riser example, I'll use the Aimpoint Micro LRP mount, and then on that we'll use the high 39mm spacer. My recommendation, the Comp M5 or the Romeo 5. Right now I love the Comp M5, and you can press N to see the picture and H to remove the buttons. So this is pretty good. On the other hand, we could get an EOTech. Any will do, but I personally prefer the 553, the 552, or the XPS-3. They're all pretty good. If you're going for a laser, always go for the Holosun laser or the PEC 15. The PEC 16 is a huge waste of weight in my opinion. And for our riser, use the Unity Fast or the SE Irregulars. Both of them are fine and both of them are good. But for now, we'll stick with an EXPS-3. Just an EXPS-3. As for ammo, as I usually say in my videos, use M855. For close ranges, damage is more important than velocity. You can see it's pretty kicky from longer ranges. But as we get closer, the thing has superb recoil control and it looks good while doing it. It's also good in point aim. And then let's move on to our GPRs. Alright, once again we are back with the default gun and today we're going to do the GPRs. Let's start this time with our receivers and our barrels once again. When it comes to the receiver, any of the Daniel defenses will do. However, the Noveskis will also do well. The light TX15 is also pretty good. However, it's very situational. In my opinion, stick with the Daniel defenses or the Noveski N4. For this one, we'll use the M4V7. For our barrel, there's really 4 options once again. We can use the KS1 dimpled 13.7 inch mid-length gas tube barrel. We can use one of the 14.5s, the SOCOM or the government 14.5, or we can use the 12.5. However, as I said before, this one the bastard sword of barrel length, so it's really niche in application. In my opinion, stick with the KS1 barrel, or if you're really inclined, you can use the 14.5 because that's SOCOM 14.5 because that's pretty good in terms of stats. For this one, we'll use the KS1. For the gas block, always use the Daniel Defense Mark 12 low profile, especially with the 13.7 inch. It is very painful to find a handguard that works with the front sight post. When it comes to handguard, your options are pretty similar. Always use AZALI, the Daniel Defense quad rail, one of the CAC RAS 12-inch rails is also good, but you could also use the Midwest Industries this time. The Midwest Industries pretty similar to the CACs. So in that regard, they're pretty good. For now, I will use the 13-inch CAC URX6. For our lower, I'd advise in this case, always use the down defense or the radiant weapons if you really don't need the fun switch, which is a debate for another time. I'll use this for now. For the bolt, it's really between the bufferless and the radiant weapons. Use the radiant weapons. For the castle nut, once again, for the stock, once again, the argument is between the Colt 607 buffer tube and the regular stocks. If you're going with the regular stock, LMT SOP mod, MOE carbine stock, SLK, or the Daniel Defense collapsible mil spec. Usually I will go with the MOE or the SOP mod. But if there was an CTR, I would definitely go for the CTR. For the grip, always use one of the mag pulls, or if you're using the Daniel Defense lower, the BCM, because those are the perfect balance of recoil control, looks, and ergo. For trigger, same as the SBRs, and as usual with the bolt catch and the fire selector, always pick the radiant weapons. For charging handle, it's the same thing. For the magazine, you always use one of the PMags, whether it be the 40 round or the 30 round, as long as it's not the 60 round drum, because that's really cumbersome and it's not good for GPR rolls. Here we'll use a mag assist. For M-lock, you can either take a 5-slot M-lock and then take a vertical foregrip like the VPG, place it around here, or we could go with the M-lock stuff like the Aeronox AX. Here it's pretty much up to how well you can control recoil. If you're confident in your recoil controlling capabilities, go with the higher ergo grips. If you're not that confident though, go with the MVG or the flipped BCM gunfighter. For the muzzle device, use the Surefire War Comp, or you could use one of the CACs. The CACs in question are the QDC M4QD or the QDC 3-prong. In this case, we will use the 3-prong, and you can use one of the suppressors. Which one is up to you. I personally prefer the shorter one. For these builds, M855 is still a good ammo. However, the playing field opens up to using the default Fed-Am American Eagle. Now that we're on top, we also want to use iron sights. Go with the CAX or the Aeronox once again. Now, this is not a necessity, however, in my opinion, these are the best front sights and rear sights. Then, here's the optic selection. It's pretty similar to the SBRs. You can use the EOTechs as usual, or you could go with a micro, like the micro LRP. However, the playing field opens to such things as magnifiers. So, for example, let's take the SC Irregulars. With the EOTech, we'll take an EOTech EXPS3. Then, on the back, we can put on a 4-slot board. And on that, we'll put on a G23-33 pivot mount. We'll put one riser because that's how it works with the EXPS series. And we can put it on like that. Additionally, if you really don't want the laser on the main Picatinny rail of your gun, just take an 8-slot board, and for this example, we'll use a PEG 15. Something like this. With GPRs, you're able to go out to longer ranges. So, you can start using things such as magnifiers. With GPRs, it's also best for use on night maps, so always put on some kind of flashlight. Here's its performance. You'll find it's easier to take more shots, although I am taking them less frequently. Much easier. Now that concludes our GPR section. Now on to the mid-range rifle section. Alright, we are back with another gun, and now we're going to make our mid-range build. The line is pretty blurred between the GPRs in terms of building them because they're pretty similar. However, one general rule of thumb is that unless you're making an M4 FSP build, never use the M4 standard. It takes up a lot of space and it's not worth it even with the Ergo. So unless you're going to be using this handguard or this handguard, I would not recommend using the M4 standard gas block. With the mid-range rifles, you're generally gonna want to use any 14.5 or 16-inch barrel. However, if you're crazy enough, you could get a 14.5, get a 1-inch extension, and then you get a 15-inch. 15-inch is also pretty good, but once again, like the 12.5, it's niche and what is considered a bastard sword. So, it's better to stick with your 14.5 or 16-inch. One or the other. When it comes to handguards, as said before, it's really the RIS-2 and the Geissele that are best. However, if you're willing to sacrifice some minor performance, you could use one of these like 2A Armament Builder series. They're not exactly the best looking, however, they're also good. You could use one of these CAC M5 RASes, they're also good. The URX, the LVOAs, which theirs are pretty underrated. You can't put attachments on them. However, the recoil is just immaculate. You could use the Noveski, or if you're feeling really mid-rangey, you could use the Mark 10 RL. For today, we'll try the CAC URX 14.5 inch, and I've changed my mind. I will use a 16-inch today. When it comes to uppers, once again, it's really just the Daniel defenses. However, in this case, because it's a mid-range rifle, recoil control is a bit more important. So, use the M4A1 Daniel defense upper. With the muzzle device, use the Warcomp, the CAC QTC 3-prong, or you could use the Daniel defense Wave MB, or you could get the knurled and find something there. However, it's pretty ugly. So today we're gonna stick with the Warcomp and put on a can once again. For stock, this time there really is no competition, just use the regular stocks. The STR, the MOE, the LMT SOP mod, the HK Slimline, the default M4SS, and the Brownells XM177 car are all good options. However, for these kind of builds, I stick with the MOE or the LMT SOP mod. So today we're gonna go with the SOP mod. For the grip, it all depends on your receiver once again. In my opinion, the M4 carbine, or if you really want better performance, use the Noveske N4. With the grip, it's the MOE-K2, the MOE-AR-15, the HK Battle, or the BCM Gunfighter Mod 3. Our receiver stuff is the same thing, however, I do like using the Radian Vertex trigger a bit more sometimes. Not all the time, just sometimes. With magazines, you can use the PMag M3 windowed, however, 20 rounds are also welcome because you're gonna be taking more mid-range shots. In general, the gun without any attachments on the Picatinny is going to be heavier, but that's fine. On the bottom, it's really just take an 11 slot M-lock Picatinny and then get AFG-2, or you could use one of the M-lock BCM stuffs. Never ever put more than one of these grips onto your gun. On top, here's where things are different. You can either go with the EOTech and magnifier combo once again. We'll try a 553 this time. Or we could start going with magnified optics. So we'll take an Alkaline Spectre. With this one, you can't put a rear sight on it. However, it is pretty good. Or you could go with the TA51 flat top mount, and you could use one of the ACOGs. The burst is also good. This is one of the best prism scopes right now. But I do like the TA31s and the TA11 more. Or you could start going up to LPVOs. Always use either the Badger 30mm mount or the Burris ARPEPR. For this one, we'll use the Badger. For the ring half, always use the front with the Badger. And put on your Condition 1 30mm for the RMR. Or you could use an offset mount. However, we are not competition and we don't require more than 2 red dots. For lasers, with the mid-range, it's starting to get a bit optional. However, it's still good to have one. So, take the Holosun. Spec is also good. However, they're better with Alcans. Here, you don't necessarily need to put on irons. However, we will put on a front base just for the sake of it. That's pretty much it. It has less ergo, a bit heavier, if you're not using a riser, than the GPRs. However, they do have a bit better recoil stats. Speaking of, here's the part where you can start to use CBC. Velocity and penetration will allow you to penetrate through body parts and kill people in one shot if you shoot them from the right place. Now, here is our reticle. With LPVOs, I find it's pretty good to use this around 4 times. And what I like to call 1.5 times. But then there won't be use for the piggyback optic, so try to use the piggyback. It works for sighting in. And that concludes our mid-range rifle section. Let's move on to our final section before the bonus section, I'll say. Alright, we are on our final kind of M4 build, the SPR. Starting with our stock, you can either use the Magpul PRS Gen 3. This is one of the better options, except for the fact that I do not like how this thing looks. Or you could go with the MOE or the LMT soft mod, the same as usual. The STR is also a good option. However, you could also use the UTG A2 fixed stock, that's also a good option. Or you could get the Colt A2 buffer tube and use the Magpul PRS Gen 2. Those are also good stocks. I personally dig the Magpul UBR Gen 2. For our upper receiver, there's 3 good options. There's the TX15 regular if you're going for a TX15, the Mark 12 upper for those G-Watt kind of things, and the Daniel Defense M4A1. That also works pretty well. In this case, I will go with the Mark 12. For the lower, if you want the true SPR experience, go with the Radian Weapons AX556 ADAC 15. However, if you do like the look of the Daniel defense, that won't stop you. It's still pretty good. Change your bolt catch, your fire selector, and your bolt all to the radiant weapons. And for a trigger, I recommend using the Timney drop-in or the Rise Armaments Blitz. Both of these feel very good, however, usually I would prefer the Rise Armaments Blitz as usual. For our rear grip, you can use the PMM Scar Modified, this is a really good one. Or you could use the MOEK2. Or you could use the Ergo PSG. This is my favorite option, actually. With charging handles, in this case, it doesn't really matter. As for your barrel, the shortest length you're gonna wanna have it is 16 inches. Not anything more shorter because that's no longer SPR territory, that's mid-range territory, LPVO territory. However, optimal length is probably the 18 inch or the 20 inch. In my opinion, go with the 20 inch. If you're really not caring about ergo as much, use the H-bar barrel. However, for 20 inch, I usually use the government. For handguards, the M16A4 handguard, the M5 RAS is good. However, you can't go wrong with a M4A1 RIS 2 or with the Aeronox, which is pretty ugly, but yeah, it's okay. Or the 2A armament builders or the Kaki RX. I'm not sure if there's one that fits there. Or you could just go with the Midwest Industries. Or you could remove the gas block and use whatever handguard you like as long as it's compatible, because with DMRs it doesn't really matter what handguard you use. For this one, I will be using the M5 RAS, and I'm going to be using the M4 standard gas block. If you're going to be using the M4 standard, use the front side sling swivel, and that's a very painful tongue twister. I had to record this 3 times. For your muzzle device, you are going to want to use either the Warcomp or the Spikes Tactical. There is no in between. Others just simply do not work as well. If you like to use the Daniel Defense Wave, I will not stop you, but I just don't prefer it. For mags, 30 rounds is fine. However, the problem is that it's pretty heavy as is, so go with 20 mags in my opinion. I use either the Brownells or the Magpul. 10 rounds is too little in my opinion. For Picatinny, use the AFG-2 or you can use the RVG. Personally, don't use grips that are too tall. It's not really that good. So go with things like AFGs and angled grips. Especially the Airtronic. Never use the Airtronic on M4s. For barrel, as I said, 18 inches also good. As for Picatinny, here you really do not need lasers that much, but if you are going to use one, use the BE Myers Mall C1. It's offset to the side so it won't interfere with your sight picture. As for Picatinny, you can either use the NC Star Mark III Tactical. This thing is a really high magnification scope. I think this is an 8 or 10 times, but it's pretty small and it only works on 16 inches. Or you could use a Badger Ordnance 34mm mount, and you could get this kind of scope. With this, no rear sight, just use this. And you can use a piggyback mount. Doesn't really matter with the 34mm where you put it. On the sides, this is a build where it is really good to use ribs because they kind of look barren and empty. So yeah, like that. And this is about it. For ammo, this is where it is paramount that you use CBC defense. You won't be able to suppress people as much. However, the penetration is definitely worth it. It's gonna be really heavy though. And man, look at that ergo. Pretty good. With this kind of build, you're going to want to use the piggyback more often than not. And it still has a high ergo. So that's all for the main builds. I'll show you one more kind of build that's really niche and you require to be kind of experienced with the game to use it properly. Alright, this is our final kind of build. This is the PDW build. I did not mention this in the start because beginners will find this horrible to use. I've given too many beginners and they don't like it. PDW will usually have very short profiles. So with the upper, we'll use the Mark 18 upper and the radiant weapons. With these builds, it's all about ergo. So we're going to use the Troy. The Troy is not the only thing you could use. You could also use the Car 15 if you're going for a more retro style. Then for our barrel, we'll take it down to 7.5 inches. This effectively handicaps the gun to nothing beyond about 50 studs, because after that it's just torture to say the least. Then for our mag, we'll use a P mag and just use ergo attachments other than the ergo PSG in this case. It doesn't really matter. They're all going to have a very similar, if not the same, form factor. So start like this. Then we'll add a CAC rear base, something like this. And then the Radian or the Noveski Love. And then you can just put on a can. These things have very low damage. Well, not really that low. It can still two-shot people, but the range is just abysmal. I mean, you can still kill people at 100 studs. It just takes 6 shots, even though the damage is still 52. I don't know how that works. The bullet drop is just interesting. However, it's an ergo beast. I would only recommend this if you're really looking for something that needs ergo. It's hard to control, but if you master it, it's really worth it. It's that fast. Yeah, so that's basically it. I'm going to give my final thoughts after this segment. Alright, now that that entire section of builds and how they work is done, what are my thoughts on each kind of build and who should use them? Ultimately, it depends on your playstyle, though it's not the biggest factor. In my opinion, that just goes to skill. Playstyle is very important. A person who is good with SBRs will be abysmal with SPRs, the long barrel ones. So basically, starting with the SPR, it's good for people who like to rush, who have fast reaction times, and are good at CQB and movement patterns. I've found that with these kind of people that I give SBRs, they usually perform well. Meanwhile, we have GPRs. This is the category that I fall into, though with a bit of modifications. The GPRs are good for people who don't have the fastest reaction times, however, are very good at close range, are very good at extending out to mid-ranges, and basically can do well at any range, hence the name General Purpose. This does not mean that you can take a one-shot kill with a red dot from 300 studs. However, it just means that you're not going to be completely defenseless when some guy tries to shoot you from said 300 studs. Third, we have the mid-range builds. The mid-range builds are what I recommend to most newbies because they don't have the fastest reaction times yet. They don't have the speed and target acquisition that the GPR and the SBR people have, and they don't really have the patience of the people who should be using SPRs. So in my opinion, therefore, new people who like having mid-range and people who don't really like engaging with the enemy that much. Finally, for SPRs, I recommend people who have patience, who have good mouses, and people who are just willing to scope in on one area, and those who are really experienced at the game, because in general SPRs are very hard to use properly on close range maps. Only a true SPR user can utilize an SPR build and still do well on close range maps. Ultimately, these builds will change depending on your journey. It's really good to have a GPR in the start of your career as a deadline player, but it's also really good to learn how to use SBRs for that reaction time and use SPRs to build up your patience. Ultimately, I think people should try one of each at least once during their career as a deadline player, as they all have things that will benefit you as a player as a whole. However, if it comes to beginners, I recommend GPRs if you already have built reaction time from other first-person shooters, or mid-range rifles, because they're just well-rounded at longer ranges and you don't need to have the fastest reaction time to do that. But anyways, that concludes this extremely long video where it was just showing you guys how to build stuff. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed and I hope you have a good one. Keep these tips in mind before you might meet me in Deadline, and I'd like to see if your builds are better than before. So yeah, see ya.